At the meeting to divide my late wife's assets, my son-in-law told me to leave. This matter is only for family. I simply opened the window and gave a signal for the show to begin. He collapsed when he saw who walked through the door. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Stanley, and I'm 64 years old. 3 weeks ago, I buried my wife Leah after 42 years of marriage. Today I'm sitting in a law office, listening to my son-in-law tell me I don't belong at my own wife's estate meeting. This matter is only for family, Skylar announces, his voice carrying that particular tone of authority. He's perfected over the past 3 years since marrying my daughter. He's standing near the mahogany conference table like he owns the place. His expensive suit catching the harsh fluorescent light that makes everyone look pale and tired. The leather chairs in Attorney Morrison's office creak as people shift uncomfortably. My daughter sits beside her husband, her eyes fixed on the stack of papers in front of her. She won't look at me. That hurts more than anything Skylar could say. I'm sorry, but I believe there's been a misunderstanding, I say, keeping my voice steady, even though my hands are trembling slightly. The smell of old law books and fresh coffee fills the room, mixing with the faint scent of Skylar's cologne, something expensive and overwhelming that Leah always said gave her headaches. Skylar turns to face me fully, and I see something in his eyes that makes my stomach clench. It's not just dismissal or irritation, it's satisfaction. He's enjoying this. Stanley, I understand this is difficult, he says, and his voice drips with false sympathy. But the documents we're discussing today involve decisions that Leah made regarding her estate. These are private family matters that require input from her immediate survivors. I was married to her for over 4 decades, I managed to say. The words feel like they're being pulled from somewhere deep in my chest. I think that makes me immediate family. Attorney Morrison clears his throat uncomfortably. He's been the family lawyer for 15 years, handled everything from Leah's will to our property transfers. His usually confident demeanor seems shaken today. Mr. Holloway, Morrison begins carefully, perhaps we should review the documents first, and then determine the appropriate parties for this discussion. But Skylar raises his hand, like he's stopping traffic. Jim, we've already discussed this. The primary beneficiaries need to make certain decisions about the property distribution. Stanley's input, while appreciated, isn't necessary for the legal proceedings. The words hit me like a physical blow. Primary beneficiaries, as if I'm some distant relative who showed up hoping for a handout. I look at my daughter again, silently, begging her to speak up, to defend me, to remember that I'm her father, and that woman we're discussing was my wife. She finally meets my eyes, and what I see there breaks something inside me. There's guilt, yes, but underneath it is something worse. Resignation. She's already made her choice. Dad, she says softly, her voice barely audible above the hum of the air conditioning. Maybe it would be better if we handled the initial paperwork ourselves. We can discuss everything with you later. The room falls silent except for the sound of papers rustling and the distant noise of traffic outside. I'm aware of every detail suddenly, the way the afternoon light slants through the blinds, creating stripes across the conference table, the tick of the old grandfather clock in the corner, the uncomfortable pressure of my tie around my neck. Skylar is watching me with that same satisfied expression, waiting to see if I'll fight or surrender. My daughter is staring at her hands, her wedding ring catching the light. Attorney Morrison is organizing papers with unnecessary precision, clearly uncomfortable with the entire situation. I think about Leah lying in that hospital bed just 6 weeks ago, her hand barely strong enough to squeeze mine, whispering about how worried she was about our daughter's future. I think about the conversations we had in those final days, her voice growing weaker, but her concern for our family never wavering. I think about the folder, hidden in my study at home, filled with documents that would change everything happening in this room right now. But mostly, I think about how Leah always said that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is wait for the right moment to act. I stand up slowly, my knees protesting, after sitting in the uncomfortable chair for the past hour. Every eye in the room follows my movement. Skylar's expression shifts slightly, as if he's surprised I'm giving up so easily. "You're absolutely right," I say, and my voice sounds calmer than I feel. "This is a family matter." I walk toward the large window that overlooks the parking lot. The law office is on the 3rd floor of a downtown building. And from here I can see the courthouse across the street. The small park where Leah and I used to eat lunch when we had business in this part of town. The bus stop where elderly people wait with their shopping bags and tired expressions. I can also see the black sedan parked directly across from the building's entrance, and the 2 men in dark suits sitting inside it, checking their watches. I turn back to the room and catch Skylar's eye. For just a moment, I let him see something in my expression that makes his confident smirk falter. "Before I go," I say, walking back toward the table, "I want to make sure we're all clear about what we're doing here." Attorney Morrison looks up from his papers, his brow furrowed with concern. "Stanley, if you have questions about the estate planning documents, we can certainly schedule a separate meeting, too." "Oh, I don't have questions about the documents," I interrupt gently. "I'm quite familiar with what Leah actually wanted versus what these papers claim she wanted." The temperature in the room seems to drop several degrees. Skylar's face has gone very still, and I can see a muscle working in his jaw. "What exactly are you implying?" he asks. And for the first time today, his voice has lost some of its polished control. I reach into my jacket pocket and pull out my phone, checking the time. 2:15 in the afternoon. Perfect. "I'm not implying anything," I say. "I'm simply stating that there are some discrepancies between what my wife told me about her wishes and what these legal documents suggest." My daughter finally looks up, and I can see confusion mixing with the guilt in her eyes. "Dad, what are you talking about?" I walk back to the window and glance down at the street. The black sedan is still there, and now I can see a 3rd man approaching the building's entrance. He's wearing a badge clipped to his belt, and he's moving with the purposeful stride of someone who has a job to do. "Skylar," I say, still looking out the window, "before we proceed with any of these estate decisions, I think there are some things you need to explain to everyone in this room." "I don't know what you're talking about," he says, but his voice has gotten tight. Controlled in a way that tells me he's fighting to maintain his composure. I turn away from the window and raise my hand, giving a small, deliberate wave toward the street below. The silence that follows is so complete, I can hear my own heartbeat. Attorney Morrison is looking between Skylar and me with growing alarm. My daughter's eyes are wide, moving from her husband to her father, like she's watching a tennis match she doesn't understand. Skylar follows my gaze to the window, and I watch his face change as he processes what he sees. The color drains from his cheeks, and his hands, which had been resting confidently on the back of his chair, begin to tremble slightly. "What did you do?" he whispers. And for the first time since I've known him, Skylar sounds like exactly what he is. A frightened man who realizes his time has run out. The sound of heavy footsteps echoes from the hallway outside, growing closer with each passing second. Multiple sets of footsteps, moving with the deliberate pace of people who know exactly where they're going and what they're there to do. I look at my daughter, and my heart breaks a little more at the confusion and fear in her eyes. She has no idea what's about to happen. She has no idea what the man she married has been doing to our family. But she's about to find out. The only family matter we need to discuss, I say quietly, is why my wife died terrified of her own son-in-law and what he did to force her to change her will while she was too weak to fight back. The footsteps stop right outside the door. 3 months before Leah died, I found her crying in our bedroom at 2 o'clock in the morning. Not the quiet tears of someone processing grief about her diagnosis. Those I had seen many times during her battle with cancer. This was different. This was the desperate, frightened sobbing of someone who felt trapped. When I asked what was wrong, she just shook her head and said she was worried about our daughter's future. At the time, I assumed she meant the natural concerns any dying mother would have about leaving her child behind. I held her close, stroked her graying hair that had grown back in soft tufts after her final round of chemotherapy, and promised her that everything would be okay. I had no idea that her tears were about something much more immediate and terrifying than death itself. The first real sign that something was wrong came 2 weeks later. I was paying bills at the kitchen table, something I'd always handled because Leah said numbers gave her headaches, when I noticed a withdrawal from our savings account, $8,000 taken out in a single transaction. The notation said, Family Emergency Fund Transfer. I stared at the bank statement for a long time, trying to remember any emergency that would require that kind of money. Leah's medical bills were covered by insurance. Our daughter had never asked us for financial help. In fact, she'd always been proud of her independence, something that apparently changed after she married Skylar. When I asked Leah about it over dinner, her reaction was telling. She dropped her fork, and her hand went immediately to her throat, a nervous gesture she only made when she was deeply upset. "Oh, that," she said, not meeting my eyes. I gave it to them for some unexpected expenses, house repairs, I think. But I knew my wife after 41 years of marriage. I knew when she was lying, and I knew when she was afraid, the way she wouldn't look at me, the way her voice got higher when she was trying to sound casual. These were all signals I'd learned to read decades ago. I didn't push the subject that night because she was already so weak, so fragile. The cancer was taking everything from her piece by piece, and I couldn't bear to add more stress to her daily struggle just to breathe, just to keep food down, just to make it through another day. That was my first mistake. I chose to protect her feelings instead of protecting her from what I was beginning to suspect was happening. The second withdrawal appeared 3 weeks later, $12,000 this time, with the same vague notation about family assistance. When I brought it up, Leah's reaction was even more extreme. She started crying immediately, but when I tried to comfort her, she pulled away. "Stanley, please," she whispered, her voice so quiet I had to lean forward to hear her. "Please don't make this harder than it already is." Those words should have been a warning bell, loud enough to wake the dead. Instead, I convinced myself that she was just emotional about her diagnosis, that the medications were affecting her judgment, that she wanted to help our daughter prepare financially for life without her mother. I told myself a lot of comfortable lies that fall, while my wife was being systematically terrorized in her own home. The third withdrawal was $15,000, and this time I didn't ask Leah about it directly. Instead, I decided to call our daughter myself. If there was a genuine family emergency, I wanted to help however I could. "Dad, I appreciate you checking," she said when I reached her at work, "but everything's fine. We're just doing some home improvements. Skylar's been handling all the financial planning." Skylar's been handling it. That phrase stuck with me long after I hung up the phone. Our daughter had always managed her own money with careful precision. She'd been balancing checkbooks since she was 12 years old, saved every penny from her first job to buy her own car. The idea that she would hand over financial decisions to anyone, even her husband, seemed completely out of character. That night, I sat in my study after Leah had gone to sleep, staring at the bank statements spread across my desk. $27,000 in 3 months. All of it supposedly voluntary gifts to help our daughter with expenses that she claimed she didn't need. Something was very wrong. I started paying attention to things I had previously ignored. The way Skylar's voice changed when he talked to Leah. Softer, more intimate, but with an undertone that made my skin crawl. The way our daughter had started deferring to him in conversations, even about subjects where she clearly knew more than he did. The way Leah would tense up whenever his name was mentioned. Most disturbing of all was the way Leah had started asking me strange questions about our financial assets. How much was the house worth? Did I have the paperwork for her life insurance policy? Where did we keep the documentation for our investment accounts? When I asked why she needed to know, she said she wanted to make sure everything was properly organized for after she was gone. It seemed like a reasonable explanation. People facing terminal illness often want to tie up loose ends, make sure their surviving spouse won't have to deal with complicated paperwork during grief. But something about her urgency felt wrong. She wasn't asking these questions during quiet, reflective moments when we were talking about her legacy or memories she wanted to preserve. She was asking them after phone calls with our daughter, or after visits from Skylar when she seemed agitated and distracted. The worst moment came in early December. I had driven to the pharmacy to pick up her pain medication, a trip that had become routine as her condition worsened. And when I returned home, I heard voices from the living room. Skylar was there sitting across from Leah on our couch, and he was speaking in a tone I had never heard him use before. Not the charming, solicitous voice he used in public. Not even the casual familiarity of a son-in-law talking to his wife's mother. This was something else entirely. "I'm not asking you to lie about anything," he was saying as I stood frozen in the hallway listening. "I'm simply explaining what needs to happen to protect everyone's interests, including Stanley's." "I don't understand why it has to be so complicated," Leah replied, and I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "Why can't we just leave everything the way we planned?" "Because circumstances change. Your medical bills alone have put a significant strain on your assets. If we don't restructure things properly, Stanley could end up losing everything to healthcare debt. Is that really what you want?" I set down the pharmacy bag as quietly as possible and moved closer to the doorway, my heart pounding so loud I was afraid they might hear it. "But the house is paid off," Leah said. "We don't have healthcare debt." "The insurance doesn't cover everything," Skylar interrupted, and his voice had gotten sharper. "There are gaps, complications you don't understand. Trust me, I've researched this extensively. The legal structure I'm proposing will protect both you and Stanley." There was a long pause, and then Leah spoke in a voice so small and defeated it made my chest ache. "What exactly do you need me to sign?" That was the moment I knew my wife wasn't making voluntary gifts to help our daughter. She was being manipulated, possibly threatened, by the man our daughter had chosen to marry. The man she trusted, the man she loved, the man who was supposed to protect and care for her, was systematically stealing from us while my wife was dying. I should have walked into that room immediately. I should have confronted Skylar, called his bluff, demanded to see whatever documentation he was claiming justified this theft. I should have protected my wife the way she had protected our family for 4 decades. Instead, I stood in the hallway, paralyzed by the implications of what I was hearing. If I confronted him directly, would he simply become more careful, more subtle in his manipulation? Would he turn our daughter against me, convince her that I was being paranoid or cruel during her mother's final months? Most terrifying of all, if he was capable of psychological warfare against a dying woman, What else might he be capable of if he felt cornered? So, I made a choice that haunts me still. I decided to gather evidence before I acted. I told myself I was being strategic, that I needed proof before I could effectively stop what was happening. The truth is, I was scared. Scared of losing my daughter's love. Scared of making my wife's final months even more painful. Scared of discovering just how deep this betrayal went. While I was being careful and strategic and scared, my wife signed documents that transferred $80,000 of her assets into accounts she didn't control, revised her will to minimize my inheritance, and changed the beneficiary on her life insurance policy to include provisions that would benefit a man who was terrorizing her in her own home. 3 weeks before she died, Leah stopped asking me about our financial assets. She stopped crying in the middle of the night. She stopped mentioning Skylar's visits, or our daughter's mysterious need for money. At first, I thought this meant the pressure had stopped, that whatever crisis had been driving these strange financial decisions had been resolved. Now I understand what really happened. My wife gave up fighting because she realized no one was coming to rescue her. She signed whatever documents Skylar put in front of her because she was too tired, too sick, too isolated to resist anymore. The last coherent conversation we had was 3 days before she slipped into the final coma. She was lying in our bed, so thin I could see the outline of her bones beneath the pale skin, but her eyes were clearer than they had been in weeks. "Stanley," she whispered, reaching for my hand with fingers that felt like paper. "I need you to promise me something." "Anything," I said, and I meant it with everything I had left. "Don't let him destroy our daughter. She doesn't know what he really is. When you find out the truth, and you will find out the truth, remember that she's a victim too." I didn't understand what she meant at the time. I thought she was talking about the natural challenges any marriage faces, or perhaps some personality conflicts she had observed between Skylar and our daughter. Now I know she was trying to warn me that what he had done to her, he was also doing to the child we both loved more than life itself. My wife died, knowing that she had been betrayed, stolen from, and psychologically tortured by someone our family had trusted. She died knowing that I had failed to protect her when she needed me most. But she also died knowing that I would eventually discover the full scope of what he had done, and she trusted me to find a way to save our daughter from the same fate. That trust is why I spent the 3 weeks after her funeral not grieving properly, but investigating. That trust is why I hired private detectives instead of planning memorial services. That trust is why I documented every suspicious transaction, every forged signature, every piece of evidence that proved my wife's final months had been a nightmare, orchestrated by the man sitting across from me right now, acting like he has a right to control her legacy. The footsteps in the hallway are getting closer, and I can see the fear growing in Skylar's eyes as he begins to understand that his time is running out. My wife's trust is why I'm about to make sure he pays for every tear she cried. Every night, she lay awake in terror. Every document she signed with hands that shook from more than illness. The door handle turns, and everything is about to change. The door opens with a quiet click that somehow sounds thunderous in the absolute silence of the conference room. Detective Maria Santos enters first, her badge clearly visible on her navy blazer, followed by Detective James Wheeler and a third man I recognize as Agent Richardson from the district attorney's office. My daughter gasps, her hand flying to her mouth as she stares at the badges. Attorney Morrison drops his pen, and I can hear it rolling across the polished mahogany table in the sudden quiet. But my eyes are fixed on Skylar, watching his face cycle through confusion, realization, and finally a kind of calculating panic that tells me everything I need to know about who he really is. Good afternoon, Detective Santos says, her voice professionally calm. We're looking for Skylar Morrison Welsh. We have some questions regarding financial irregularities connected to several estate cases in this jurisdiction. The words hit the room like a physical force. Skylar's face has gone completely white, but he's still standing behind his chair, still trying to maintain some semblance of control. I can see his mind working, searching for an escape route that doesn't exist. I think there's been some mistake, he says, and his voice is steady, despite the fear I can see in his eyes. I'm here for a private family meeting about my late mother-in-law's estate. Detective Wheeler steps forward, consulting a small notebook. Skylar Morrison Welsh, age 35, married to Jennifer Holloway Welsh, son-in-law to Stanley, and the late Leah Holloway. Yes, but I don't understand what this has to do with Mr. Welsh, Attorney Morrison interrupts. Detective Santos continues gently. We'd like to ask you about your relationship with Eleanor Hartwick, Martha Donovan, and Ruth Chen. Do those names sound familiar? I watch Skylar's face carefully, and I see the exact moment when he realizes how much trouble he's in. There's a tiny muscle that starts twitching near his left eye, and his hands grip the back of the chair so tightly that his knuckles turn white. I've never heard those names before, he says, but his voice has lost some of its smoothness. My daughter is looking back and forth between her husband and the detectives like she's watching a car accident happen in slow motion. What is this about? She asks, and her voice sounds very small in the large room. Detective Santos turns to address her directly, and her expression softens with what I recognize as professional sympathy. Mrs. Welsh, we're investigating a pattern of financial exploitation targeting elderly women and their families. Your husband's name has come up in connection with several cases. That's impossible, my daughter says immediately, reaching for Skylar's hand, but I notice that he doesn't reach back, doesn't provide the reassuring squeeze or supportive gesture that a loving husband would offer. Instead, he's focused entirely on the detectives, his mind clearly working on damage control rather than comforting his wife. Agent Richardson opens a leather portfolio and pulls out a thick stack of documents. Mr. Welsh, we have records showing that over the past 5 years, you've had intimate relationships with at least 6 different women, all of whom lost significant amounts of money during or shortly after your involvement in their lives. This is outrageous, Skylar says, but I can hear the desperation creeping into his voice. I'm a married man. I love my wife. This is obviously some kind of mistaken identity situation. Detective Wheeler pulls out his phone and shows Skylar the screen. This is a photograph taken 3 months ago at the Riverside Cafe downtown. Would you care to explain why you're having lunch with Martha Donovan while holding her hand across the table? I can't see the photograph from where I'm sitting, but I can see my daughter's face as she stares at the phone screen. The color drains from her cheeks, and she takes an involuntary step backward as if the image physically pushed her. Jenny, Skylar starts, reaching for her now, but she jerks away from his touch. Who is Martha Donovan? She asks, and her voice is barely a whisper. Detective Santos answers gently. She's a 72-year-old widow who lost her husband 18 months ago. According to her family, she met your husband at a grief support group and believed she was in a committed romantic relationship with him. During their 6-month relationship, she gave him access to her financial accounts and lost approximately $90,000. The numbers hit the room like individual blows. $90,000, 6 months, grief support group. Each detail paints a picture so ugly and predatory that I feel sick to my stomach. My daughter is staring at Skylar with an expression I've never seen before. It's not anger yet. It's deeper than that. It's the look of someone watching their entire understanding of reality crumble in real time. Skylar, she says, and his name sounds different coming from her mouth now. Tell them this is wrong. Tell them you've never met these women. But Schuyler isn't looking at his wife anymore. He's focused on Agent Richardson, who has pulled out another set of documents. We also have bank records showing transfers from Leah Holloway's accounts to a secondary account registered under the name Scott Morrison. Agent Richardson continues, the same name that appears on rental agreements for an apartment where you've been meeting Martha Donovan and Eleanor Hartwick. Scott Morrison, the false identity lands in my stomach like a stone. Not only was he stealing from my wife, but he was using a fake name to do it, creating an entire parallel life built on lies and theft. Attorney Morrison, the real Morrison, finally speaks up, his voice shaky with professional concern. I think we should pause this meeting until Mr. Welsh can obtain legal representation. That's his right. Detective Santos agrees. But, Mr. Welsh, we do need you to come with us to answer some questions. We have a warrant. She produces the legal document from her jacket, and I watch Schuyler's last hope of controlling this situation disappear. He takes the warrant with hands that are visibly trembling now, his eyes scanning the official language that spells out exactly how much the authorities already know. My daughter has sunk into one of the leather chairs, her face buried in her hands. I want to go to her to offer comfort, but I know this isn't over yet. There are still revelations coming that will hurt even more than what she's already heard. Before we go, Detective Wheeler says, consulting his notebook again, Mr. Holloway, we understand you've been cooperating with our investigation. Is that correct? Every eye in the room turns to me. Schuyler's expression shifts from panic to rage as he realizes what that means. You? He says, and his voice is raw with fury. You did this. You turned them against me. I meet his gaze steadily. I protected my family the only way I could. Stanley, my daughter says, lifting her head to stare at me. What does he mean? What did you do? I take a deep breath, knowing that what I'm about to tell her will change our relationship forever, but also knowing that the truth is the only thing that might save her. 3 months ago, I started noticing irregularities in your mother's accounts. I begin. Money disappearing, documents being changed, your mother becoming increasingly frightened and withdrawn. When I realized what was happening, I contacted the authorities. You've been investigating my husband for 3 months. Her voice is rising, and I can hear the betrayal mixing with the shock. While Mom was dying, you were spying on my family. I was protecting our family, I say quietly, including you. Detective Santos steps forward diplomatically. Mrs. Welsh, your father's cooperation has been invaluable in documenting a pattern of elder abuse and financial exploitation. Without his evidence, we might never have been able to connect your husband to the other victims. Other victims. The phrase hangs in the air like smoke. My daughter's husband isn't just a man who made some questionable financial decisions. He's a predator with a system, a method, multiple victims. Schuyler is still staring at me with undisguised hatred. You have no idea what you've done, he says. You think you're protecting her, but you're destroying her. She'll never forgive you for this. Maybe not, I admit, but she'll be alive and free to make that choice. Agent Richardson closes his portfolio and signals to the detectives. Mr. Welsh, we need to go now. As they move toward Schuyler, he makes one last desperate attempt to control the narrative. He turns to my daughter, and for a moment, his expression shifts back to something that might look like love if you didn't know what I know about him. Jenny, baby, listen to me, he says urgently. This is all a misunderstanding. These people are lying, manipulating evidence because your father turned them against me. You know me. You know I would never hurt you or your family. My daughter looks up at him, and for a terrible moment, I think she might believe him. I think she might choose the comfortable lie over the painful truth. But then Detective Santos speaks again, and her words cut through whatever spell Schuyler was trying to weave. Mrs. Welsh, among the evidence we've collected are recorded phone conversations between your husband and Martha Donovan, where he discusses his marriage to you as a business arrangement and refers to you as a necessary inconvenience until the inheritance clears. The words hit my daughter like a physical blow. I watch her face crumple, not with sadness, but with something deeper and more devastating. The complete destruction of everything she believed about the man she married and the life they built together. No, she whispers, but it's not a denial of the evidence. It's a denial of the reality she's being forced to accept. Schuyler tries one more time. Jenny, please. The word comes out sharp and final. Don't say my name. Don't touch me. Don't look at me. Detective Wheeler takes Schuyler's arm gently but firmly. We need to go now, sir. As they lead him toward the door, Schuyler looks back at the room he controlled just 20 minutes ago. His eyes find mine one last time, and I see something there that chills me more than his anger or his panic. I see the calculation of a man who isn't finished fighting yet. This isn't over, Stanley, he says quietly, his voice carrying a promise that makes my skin crawl. You have no idea what you've started. Then he's gone, and the room falls into a silence so complete I can hear my daughter crying, and the tick of the grandfather clock, and my own heart hammering against my ribs. But I also hear something else in that silence. I hear the sound of truth finally being spoken, of secrets finally being exposed, of justice finally beginning to be served. My wife can rest now. Her tormentor is in custody. But as I look at my daughter's devastated face, I realize that the hardest part of this fight is just beginning. The silence after Schuyler's arrest stretches for what feels like hours, but is probably only minutes. My daughter Jenny sits motionless in the leather chair, staring at the space where her husband was standing moments before. Attorney Morrison is gathering papers with shaking hands, clearly overwhelmed by the revelation that his client meeting has turned into a crime scene. Detective Santos remains in the room, her presence both comforting and ominous. Mrs. Welsh, Detective Santos says gently, pulling up a chair to sit beside my daughter, I know this is overwhelming. Would you like us to explain what we've discovered about your husband's activities? Jenny looks up slowly, and I can see she's gone into some kind of shock. Her face is pale, but dry. She's moved beyond tears into that numb space where trauma lives. How long? She asks, and her voice sounds hollow. How long has he been doing this? Detective Santos exchanges a glance with Agent Richardson, who opens his portfolio again. Based on our investigation, we believe the pattern started approximately 7 years ago. The first documented case we can prove involves a widow named Helen Carpenter in Phoenix. 7 years. I watch my daughter process this information. She and Schuyler have been married for 3 years, which means he was already an active predator when they met. Their entire relationship was built on a foundation of ongoing criminal activity. We believe, Agent Richardson continues carefully, that your husband targeted women who had recently lost spouses or were dealing with serious medical issues. He would establish relationships through support groups, volunteer organizations, or social events where vulnerable people might be seeking connection and comfort. Jenny's hands are clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles have turned white. The grief support group, she whispers, that's where we met. I was going through a difficult breakup, feeling lost, and he seemed so understanding, so caring. The pieces clicked together with horrible clarity. Even my daughter was a mark chosen not for love, but for her potential value as a stepping stone to our family's assets. Detective Santos nods sympathetically. That appears to be his pattern. He's very skilled at identifying women who are emotionally vulnerable and financially stable. In your case, he likely saw an opportunity to access not just your resources, but your parents' estate as well. Show her the files, I say quietly. I need Jenny to understand the full scope of what she married, not just the pieces that directly affected our family. Agent Richardson hesitates. Mr. Holloway, this information is quite disturbing. Are you sure? She needs to know everything, I insist, meeting Jenny's eyes. She deserves to know the truth about the man she trusted. Jenny takes a shaky breath and nods. Yes, I want to know everything. Agent Richardson opens the portfolio fully and spreads several photographs and documents across the conference table. What I see makes my stomach turn, but I force myself to look because Jenny needs to see me facing this truth with her. Eleanor Hartwick, age 68. Agent Richardson begins pointing to a photograph of a silver-haired woman with kind eyes. She lost her husband in a car accident 2 years ago. She met your husband at a church social event where he introduced himself as Scott Morrison, a grief counselor. The photograph shows Eleanor smiling beside Skylar at what appears to be a restaurant. He has his arm around her shoulders, and she's looking at him with unmistakable affection. Eleanor gave him access to her checking account to help with investment opportunities. Detective Santos continues, over 6 months, she lost $47,000. When she began asking questions about the investments, he disappeared completely. Jenny stares at the photograph with a mixture of horror and recognition. That's the smile, she says faintly. That's the exact same smile he gave me when we first met. Agent Richardson places another photograph on the table. Ruth Chen, age 74, widowed 8 months when she met your husband at a senior center volunteer event. He told her he was David Morris, a financial advisor helping elderly people protect their assets. This photograph shows Skylar helping an elderly Asian woman with grocery bags outside a supermarket. He looks attentive, helpful, trustworthy. Everything about his body language suggests a caring relationship with someone he genuinely values. Ruth lost $32,000 in fraudulent investment schemes. Detective Santos explains, she also signed over power of attorney for her medical decisions, which your husband used to access her prescription medications. Prescription medications? Jenny asks, and I can hear her voice getting tighter with each revelation. Pain medications primarily, Agent Richardson explains. We believe he was reselling them, but we also suspect he may have used them to incapacitate victims when he needed to access their financial documents or force signatures. The implication hits me like a physical blow. Those last weeks when Leah seemed confused, when she would drift off in the middle of conversations, when she signed documents she later couldn't remember. Was that the cancer medication, or was it something else entirely? Did he? I start then stop, not sure I want to hear the answer. Did he use drugs on my wife? Detective Santos meets my eyes with professional gentleness. We're still investigating the specifics of Mrs. Holloway's case, but based on the pattern we've observed, it's possible. Jenny makes a sound that's somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Oh God, Mom. What